You're listening to Bookin Around Town with Jacques on the Audio Flow.
Hi everyone, welcome to Bookin Around Town. I am your host, Jacques, and today we are booking around the town of sunny San Diego. I wish that I were really there. Unfortunately, I'm not, and where I am is fairly cold. But luckily for today's guest, they get to enjoy the sunshine and chat with me about it. I'm excited to have today's special guest on the show because I had not really read any of her work. But you all know that I'm big on audiobooks, so I decided that I would start listening to one of the series that just came out not too long ago. While I was doing that, I had a chance to chat with her a little bit, and I'm so excited that she's going to share with us today about how this particular series came to be, upcoming projects, and some other unknown facts that you may not know about her. So please help me welcome today's guest, Kennedy Ryan. Well, hi, Kennedy. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Welcome to Bookin Around Town. I know we've kind of been playing record tag over the last few weeks, and I'm so happy we finally have this time to quote, end quote, sit down and have a chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Thank you for your patience in during that time where I had no voice, because this episode would have been totally one-sided if it was just you talking and me not saying anything. So lucky for you get my voice.
Yes, it's a beautiful voice. I love it.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. So we are in October, and I always like to get a little feel for the people that I have on my show. And so thanks. Well, first of all, Halloween is coming. Now, are you the type of person that celebrates Halloween as, you know, it's just another day and maybe I'll give out some candy? Or are you that person that kind of goes all the way out and you treat Halloween like it's a special coveted holiday?
I would be the former.
Yes.
We give out candy, and we're very sweet to the people who come. But we aren't really big Halloween people. It's more an excuse to eat candy. My son, he's older now, and I only have the one. He's 16, but he has autism. He's severely autistic, actually, and he's not really into dressing up. He's obsessed with Cookie Monster, and he dressed up as Cookie. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to dress you up as Cookie Monster. And I dressed him up as Cookie Monster, completely freaked him out.
Man.
He was like, he's like screaming because he's like, how am I now Cookie Monster? So dressing up kind of freaked him out, actually, and we don't really do it anymore. But he loves all the kids who come to the door. He's the first one at the door giving out candy. So that's kind of his little outlet, his socialization with all the kids in our neighborhood. So
I
that's
love
the part
it. He's the official candy giver. So
he absolutely is. Every time the doorbell rings, he races to the door with the candy, and he doesn't talk very much. He doesn't have a lot of speech, so he just holds the candy out with this big smile, and he loves it. So that's our favorite part.
Oh, I bet that makes them happy too, because
I think so.
Especially if he's scooping out like wads of candy. You know, most people are stingy. They give you like one little mini Snicker, and it's like, no, just scoop the candy in there. So the people that come to your house should be just very ecstatic that they get the big smile and the candy from the candy giver. That's his name.
Yes, he gives them free reign. He just hands the bowl over and just lets them take whatever they want. So I'm like, we're going to be out very soon.
I love it. See, I would be totally at your house, changing in multiple costumes, getting tons of candy. So that would be my treat, is to go to your house and just stay there and beg for candy. That sounds bad, but
he'd give it to you.
All right. So
they call him the gentle giant. He's 6'2".
Oh gosh, he's really tall.
I know.
He
is. My husband's tall too. Yeah, my husband is 6'5". So I'm surrounded by giants, and he's tall and he's not done growing, but they call him the gentle giant because he's such a sweetheart, and he would up with all the candy you want.
Oh my gosh,
he just wants you to stay. That's all. He would just want you to stay.
Oh, well, I definitely have to come and visit then next time I'm out.
Yes, next time you're in California, absolutely.
I got it. So, well, how tall are you then? Are you the
I'm
short
only
one?
five. To them I am. I'm only five. I thought I was decent height. I'm 5'7". Well, actually, I'm 5'6". Am I shrinking? Like I thought I was five
You
seven.
might
And
be.
the last time I went to the doctor, she was like 5'6". I was like, did I lose it? Could I lose that inch on my waist instead of off my head? So I'm 5'6". My husband's 6'5", so he towers over me. But I like
Of
that. So
course.
yeah.
That's funny. As we get older, we do shrink. I swear I was, almost 5'4". I was like 5'3" and some
Oh, you're a
change.
shorty.
I am short. And then I go to the doctor a couple of weeks ago and they're like, oh no, you're 5'2" and 3/4. And I'm like, you're lying. That's not right. I'm not 5'2". And
Exactly.
yeah, it's awful. I'm short, but oh well. It
It's
happens.
okay.
Some of
Yes.
us just have to be short. We have to carry the short gene. So
Yeah.
all
You're doing
right.
an amazing job of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so next big holiday, Thanksgiving. So are you a big Thanksgiving person? Do you guys have any traditions that you usually follow? And do you put up your Christmas decorations before Thanksgiving or do you wait until after Black Friday?
Oh gosh, I am definitely not a before Thanksgiving person. I really wish I was. Like, first of all, I'm not a decorator.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a great decorator. If you come to my house, people are always like, "Oh, did you guys just move in?" No, we've been here for years. It's like because I'm not a great decorator. I literally have a friend who comes over to help me decorate for Christmas because I'm that inept at any kind of craft, decorating, all the things that I guess women are supposed to be awesome at. I'm not that good at. Even cooking, I'm not that great of a cook. So I would always lean heavily on my mom for Thanksgiving. And, I'm from the South, right?
Uh-huh.
So we do it up and we have
Yes.
food for days, and all the food, the stuffing, all of it, fried chicken, turkey, anything, collard greens,
Mm.
everything you can imagine, macaroni and cheese, everything. And I know, doesn't it make your mouth water?
Yes, I'm
And
so
so
hungry.
now I'm in San Diego, and like I said, my husband and I were born in North Carolina. That's where we're from. All our family is still there. We lived in Atlanta for the last 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I love Atlanta. And then my husband's job transferred us here to San Diego, so we've been here for the last 2 years, and it's another world. I love it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very different than the South, and we don't have we have no family out here, and Thanksgiving is about family,
Yeah.
and because it's such a long trip across the country, and we always go home for Christmas. So, and it's so close together, so we don't go home for Thanksgiving. So it's we're kind of making our own family here, with our friends from our church and from our community, and we kind of potluck it, and so it feels a little different. But I enjoy it. I use it as an excuse to hang out with people that sometimes I neglect. Because writing it can be very isolating,
Yeah.
and especially in a new city when you don't have a lot of friends anyway. And I tend to stay at my computer in my office all the time. And so at Thanksgiving, I really try to push myself out. Like, who could I hang out with? Who could we do dinner with? And since I'm not a great cook, we potluck it and try to
What?
piece together Thanksgiving.
Okay,
Yeah.
I gotta go back. So, first of all, you from the South,
Yes.
North Kakalaki, for lack
Or
of. That's
Kakalaki.
right, because
Born, bred.
I was there 18 years, so I would say I'm
Really?
partially North Carolinian, sort of.
You get an honorary Tar Heel card.
Exactly. Yes, the
Yeah.
Tar Heels, all about the Tar Heels, and so you can't. How can you be from North Carolina and say you're not a good cook? I just don't
Oh,
understand
honey,
that
I figured
concept.
it out. I figured that out. And you know what? My mom is an excellent cook. My sister is a great cook. I really think, and this is going to sound cliche, I was such a bookworm. I mean, to the point of I would closet myself in my room all the time, and all I did was read. And my mom would be downstairs literally teaching my sister how to cook. And my sister would be like, come down and learn how to, and I just be upstairs reading. I just completely lost myself in that. And I really didn't do a lot. I was really, really into school, into grades and into reading my books and into writing, even then writing, because I had, my first editorial column for our city paper when I was in high school. And I, for adults. So I was really on a track, and I neglected a lot of the things that I guess other people were doing, like life. And I just never really, I'm okay. Like I can bake, don't get me to telling you the things I can cook. Like I can make a great chili. I can do baked spaghetti and chicken and some of the basics. But when it gets to like throwing down, like, whoo, she's really earned. Like I don't have that gene. And my son loves collard greens, loves them. And my mother does them. They're not easy to get right, and my mom has them perfect. And so every time we go home, she has to cook a pot just for him. He eats all of them. And so I was like, well, I can do this. This is something that I can do for him. And like I told you, he doesn't talk very much. And so the first time I made them, he calls my mother Nana. I gave him the greens, and he smelled them and looked at me. And then he took one bite and pushed the plate back and said, Nana. He pushed the plate back and said, Nana. And I was like, oh,
that's terrible.
So my mom had to walk me through. She's like, see, this is why you should have been paying attention when you were growing up. And she had to walk me step by step how to get them right. So now he'll at least eat them, but he still prefers her. She has to ship them to me, like frozen.
Oh wow.
Yes, and in batches, and I just pull them out of the freezer and cook them for him. So
wow,
anyway.
that's a really. I'm saddened by this fact that you could not master the collard greens, but at least you have a backup plan.
Yes, it's a part of my Southern education that is sadly neglected. Sadly neglected.
That's okay. We will take your writing over your collard greens, since you can't typically or feed us food, so you'll feed us with writing instead. So
that I can do. That I will do all day long.
So we will take that. So you said that you were a bookworm, which I find that most people that I chat with had this idea that they wanted to write, or they were really creative when they were younger. And so, what kind of books were you into that kind of helped, push you toward this career choice?
I've always loved reading. I read really, really early. I started reading really, really early. And I write romance and women's fiction now, and that's what I loved growing up too. My mom is a preacher. My parents are both preachers, and my mom did not approve of romance novels. I for some reason I'm saying literally a lot today. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I would hide them. I would go to the library and get my romance novels and hide them in my mattress. And I would hide them in my closet and under my bed because she didn't let me read them. And so I had my back shelf and my front shelf. And I loved my front shelf just as much. So I was really into classics. I loved Jane Eyre. I loved Wuthering Heights. I loved Gone with the Wind. Great Expectations. I loved the classics. And I love Maya Angelou. I love Zora Hurston. So these are influences for me. And I love poetry. Poetry was my first love. That's where I started writing. It's so funny because my father, who is he's an academic. He is a dean of students. He's been president of a university. So he has a doctorate degree, like 2 masters. So he is really into higher education, administration, and all of that. And that's how I've always known him. And just very disciplined and very cut and dried. And when I was a little girl, we were cleaning out the garage or something, and I came across this box of poems. And I was like, who wrote these? They were so passionate and beautiful and lyrical. And my father was like, oh, I wrote those. And I said, what? Because that's just not who he is now. And he was like, yeah, when I was in college and high school, I used to write poetry. And it really sparked an appetite for me as far as poetry was concerned. And that's what I started with poetry. And I always knew that I was going to be a writer. Like some people think, okay, I'll be a fireman, I'll be whatever. No, from a very, very young age, I knew that that's what I was put on earth to do, was to communicate, was to write and to speak, but to write. And I didn't know it would be novels. My degree is in journalism. And like I said, even in high school, I had an editorial column in our city paper. And I've always leveraged my writing to voice my opinions, so that it was very appropriate for me to start with an editorial. Mm-hmm. And I think that an editorial column in our city paper, I think it was great training ground for me as a fictional novelist, because if you're writing an editorial, you're usually expressing opinions. Right. And I was expressing very strong opinions. Also, I was very young, but I was a good writer. And so people didn't realize that I was a high school student, and they would not take that into account. Like, well, this is a high school student, I should go easy on her. They would come at me with their opinions, like grown folks to grown folks. And at first, I really had to get used to the criticism and to my opinion being challenged and having to learn to defend my beliefs. And my mom would tell me, okay, if you want to be a big girl, like if you want to write for the city paper, you have to be prepared to interact with adults. You have to be prepared to defend your opinions. If you're going to express them in an open forum that way, you need to be educated on what you're saying. And, right. So it prepared me for what I do now. Because even now, like I said, my degree is in journalism. So I was a freelance writer. I'm a contributor for Modern Mom magazine. A lot of I've written for Chicken Soup for the Soul. A lot of my writing before I started writing novels was around autism advocacy, because I said, I mentioned that my son has autism. 12 years ago, I started a foundation for families who have children with autism. And I've been on, it's taken me into a lot of different realms where I get to talk about autism and write about autism, like, CNN and NPR and these different forums. And I really thought that would be my path. Like, well, maybe all my writing is going to be around autism. And then I decided autism was really consuming my life, because it's a very difficult condition, especially when your child is more severe, the way mine is. And I was, I started the foundation, and I was advocating for other families, and I was appearing on, talk shows and writing about, and I was like, my whole life is autism. I need something else. And I realized that I hadn't read a romance novel in years, and that it refreshed me, and I loved it. And I went back to it as an escape, honestly. And I just started thinking, I used to want to do this. Like all of my writing has been autism, has been like Chicken Soup for the Soul, has been parenting, has been these things that are very, very important to me. But this was just something that was just kind of mine. Yeah. And I still do all of those things. But as I started reading, I remembered this is something I want to do. And writing my first novel, it's so funny because my son, kids who have autism have these, many of them have, because they're all different individuals, but a lot of them have these fixations, obsessions, things they fixate on. And it could be forever, or it could be for just a season. And my son is often really, really fixated on water. And so we went to every day. One summer, he had to go to this particular river. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, how many days are we going to come to this river? And we would go to that river every day all summer, and we would stay until it got dark. And I was sitting there, and that's where I wrote my first book, my first full-length novel. It was a town called Rivermont. That river, sitting on that river every night with him, and my husband would be working, so it would just be the two of us. And sitting on that river every night with him, this imaginary town called Rivermont that was, rested on a river came to me, and I started writing that story, and that was my first book deal. It's four books that basically take place loosely in that town, and I'm like, wow, okay, so autism gave me something.
Your son sort of helped you inspire the story and the premise behind that series, because he led you to that water, and plus water, helps you become more peaceful. So
it absolutely did. That was every night. I went from feeling like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to do this, to I get to do this, because every night we would go, he would be in the water, and I did a lot of it on my phone. I would pull my phone out and start typing and start typing out characters. And I still do voice record a lot. I used voice record and started using it for dialogue. And it really became an escape for me from the pressures of what I was experiencing as a special needs mom and then running the foundation. And then, of course, I was still doing my full-time job. I was writing. I was working for a nonprofit organization. I had a lot going on, and writing became I was already writing, but writing this became an escape for me.
It sounds like you were, balancing a lot. So, and doing that with handling the foundation, full-time job, full-time mom, full-time wife, full-time, writing. What are some things that you had to do to make sure you were able to balance those? Because I do find that a lot of people get to that point where they, are overwhelmed, they burn out fairly quickly. So what are some things that kind of helped you, even if you weren't in the beginning, didn't start off with that balance, but what are some things that you learned during that process of how to balance yourself out?
I feel like I will talk about the things that help me, but I want to rest on what you're saying for a while because I feel like so many people, it's such a danger. Mm-hmm. I know for me it is. And part of it is because of my personality, but I think part of it too is just the culture we live in that's constantly pushing us, constantly driving us. I am very achievement oriented. Mm-hmm. And not just like I need to be the best, but anything I put my mind to, I feel like this has to happen. And it serves me well in a lot of ways, but I always feel like I always tell people every strength has a dark side, and if it's out of balance, like what you're talking about, it can easily become your greatest weakness. And for me, my drive, my internal drive, I am a workaholic. I know that. And it sounds bad. I get it from my father. I tell him all the time, I'm like this because of you, because I grew up watching my father. I was telling you, he has his doctorate. He has 2 master's degrees. He's a dean of students. He was running a university, basically, at the time he was getting his doctorate degree. And at the time when I was growing up, there was no online, so I would see him go out at 4:00 in the morning, 5:00 in the morning. He would walk because he was really into being physically fit. He would do his run. He would come home. He would go to work. And then after working at the university all day, he would go to class every night. And so I wouldn't see him until, maybe 10:00 at night ever. And I grew up thinking that's what you do. It's like, because I was such a daddy's girl. I was like, that's good. That's how you live, is you live to the very, very limit of yourself. And that was just a season of his life when he had to do that. But it came at a time when I was just coming into understanding that I was a person who was driven. And I took that and said, well, that's good. That's how you live your life. You live your life to the very, very limit and you get things done. And I still wrestle with that. My husband and I constantly go back and forth because he's like, babe, like you've got to take a break. Yeah. And they tell everybody this, but especially when a lot of special needs parents always reiterate, how they say if you are like in a plane crash or any kind of accident that you have to put the face mask on you first, to make sure that you're healthy so that you can be there for everyone else. That's a lesson that I really had to learn. When my son was first diagnosed with autism years ago, we just had a really, really hard time. And my son was diagnosed on a Thursday. The next day, my husband lost his job. And I just remember sitting in the bathroom like, what is going on? Yeah. And I became the sole breadwinner and also had to navigate this new diagnosis and realize there wasn't a lot of insurance. There wasn't a lot. We came into a season where there was just so many challenges for us as a family, and it really tested us. It tested my marriage. It tested all of my friendships. It wrecked us financially. Like, there were just so many things. And then all along, we're pouring everything into my son's care, and he wasn't getting better. And I got really depressed, like really, really depressed. And I didn't recognize it. And I just I would, be running a meeting or doing what I had to do at work, go in the bathroom and break down crying, get myself together, and then go back out and work. And I had no self-care. I had no sense of what it means to take care of yourself, but only to do whatever's in front of you and get through the next task. And I think the things that are, to answer your question, I think the things that have really helped me, one is my faith.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very strong faith, and just remaining connected to that and centered by that. And also, and I'm not doing a great job of this right now. I tell people every time I read a book, I gain 15 pounds. I mean, every time I write a new book, I gain like 15 pounds because I become very sedentary, and I lock in to my laptop and all I do is write. But when I'm being sane, really walking every day or some kind of workout, it helps me so much. It clears my mind. And I find that I write my best stuff when I'm when I have been physically active. My last book that I wrote still, that came out like, September. It was a sequel to Grip. And so I had written a prequel, Flow, and then the book Grip, and readers wanted me to write something else. And they wanted me to write something else for that couple. And I was like, no, I'm done. And I was telling somebody I just woke up with this poem that is called Still that became the book. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this. But I was out walking, and this other poem, there's a lot of original poetry. I wrote original music because I'm also a musician and a singer for the book.
Time out.
Yes.
I'm going to stop you because you do like 50 gazillion things. Like 50, and you're like one person. And so like I'm listening to you tell me all of this stuff. You're like, okay, I started out writing this. I write poetry. I'm a musician. I'm a singer. I'm a songwriter. I'm a mother. I own a foundation. I'm a wife. I help my son give out candy during Halloween. I don't really cook that much. I'm from North Carolina. I'm sort of Southern. I live in San Diego. I don't have a lot of friends, but I try to go out and help people. And I'm like, I need to take a breath just from all of that stuff you just said. Like, I don't see any balance here. I know you're going to tell me about how you balance it, but I don't see you balancing it. I'm going to hold you to that. I'm going to sit here and wait for you to tell me about the balance, besides the walking. Even though you were walking and you came up with an idea of a poem so you were still working. So like, I need to know if you go to the spa and somebody rubs your shoulders and you get hot stones or something, because man, I'm just saying.
You know what? I am not. It's so funny because I'm not a big spa person. I can't remember the last time I went to a spa, but I get pedicures and I get manicures. Like every 3 weeks or so, I do the pedicure, I do the manicure. And like I said, I try to walk every day. And my husband and I, we really have to carve out a lot of time for ourselves because our son, he takes up a lot of our time. Yeah. And when he's home, even though he's 16, he is cognitively and developmentally about 5 years old.
Right.
And so it's like having a 5-year-old in the house, but he is 6 feet 2 inches. So he demands a lot of our attention. So a lot of our date nights, our day dates, while he's in school.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one thing that I try to make sure we do is to try to carve out time for each other. So we try to be disciplined with that. I'm trying to think, what other things did I do? Did I mention the manicures and the pedicures?
You did. Okay. You said you do try to have those. But you know what? I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier about your driven personality, and that you are very, I would say, like goal oriented, or if there's things that you want to accomplish, you really don't rest until you've accomplished those. But then when it gets to the point where there's always a goal or an accomplishment, then you're always going. And so I find that I fit into that category too. I'm a workaholic too. And, but it's so important that we have that time to rest and kind of recuperate. And, even if we go biblical, Jesus still went off by himself and had to have time alone. And so I think when we don't do that, we just burn out. And then one day I'm going to find on Facebook, it's going to be like, you deactivated your page because you needed a week off to just to sleep or something. because
But you know what? I do take time.
okay,
Like I said, my faith is really important to me. So that's something like every day I'm taking time out
okay.
to connect and to make sure that I'm being refreshed. And music is such an outlet for me. Like I'll take time during the day where I literally just stop and listen to certain songs that remind me of my values, that remind me of what's true to me. So it's not that I don't rest at all. I'm just strategic about it, you know.
You strategically
And
rest.
I do, but you know, it's like I recognize there are some things that we wrestle with our whole lives. You know, it's like I'm self-aware enough. I've been through counseling and anytime I need counseling, I will find it. Just as a regular part of my emotional diet. But I am self-aware enough to recognize this thing about myself. And it's not that I don't ever slip back into it. It's that I recognize it now and I have figured out ways to self-correct. And it's not that I won't ever slip off and, oh my gosh, I'm doing that thing again where I work constantly. But it's like now when I recognize it, I know the things that get me back on track. And I'm accountable to people in my life, like my husband and certain friends who can say to me, okay, for real, like you're going to burn out. Yeah. Even when every time I release a book, I'm at the point of like almost collapsing. And my husband will say to me, okay, we're doing that thing again. And we have to talk and I take time off and I take time out and I'll veg and I'll watch television and I'll do whatever refreshes me. It's not that I don't take any time at all, but I do recognize that my drive is very, very strong. And it's not even just to always achieve, I think. It's because this is something that it's so funny because it gets to what success is to you, I think, too. I was talking with one of my friends the other day. The things that make me feel really, really successful are not book sales it's not any of that. The things that make me feel most successful are the things that I feel have impact on other people's lives. And I find that will drive me more than anything. Like my foundation, I was talking about that. We're doing we have one of the things that we do is this Christmas program. And this has taken up a lot of my life right now. But we do, every holiday season, we do a Christmas program for single parents who have children with autism. And I mean, 70% of the population that we serve is at or below the poverty line. And that is one of the most rewarding things I do. And if I could just tell you how refreshing it is, it refreshes me to do things for other people. So I am really driven, but like, I don't know if you've heard of Lift for Autism, which is it's something that in our book community is something that I and one of my really good friends and a fellow author, Ginger Scott, organize every April for Autism Awareness Month, where we have this online auction and we raise money for national autism organizations. Like that kind of stuff, it takes up a lot of my time. It requires a lot of my focus and a lot of my energy. But on Christmas morning, when I am receiving emails from these single parents who have children with autism and it's pictures of their kids who would have nothing if it weren't for this, for how this foundation intervenes. And when I get emails from people, we've raised money for through Lyft saying, the money that you guys raise is going to this and these kids are going to have this, it refreshes me. You know what I'm saying? And I know that that's not the same as stopping and resting, but there's something that where it's spiritually and emotionally that it is so rewarding about when you extend yourself on behalf of other people, not just on behalf of yourself, because one of my values, like one of my life values is generosity, and not even just financially, but with your time, with your resources, with your talents, that you are not just taking care of yourself, that you're not just taking care of your own, but that you are looking out for people who are beyond you. You know what I'm saying? And for me, that's so generating. It's so energizing for me to do something for other people and to see the impact that applying your talent and your resources and your energy, when you apply it to helping somebody else, it's more rewarding for me than anything in my life, honestly.
I can tell. I
Sorry.
No. And it was totally not a bad thing. I can hear your passion in that. And I love that because, so many people do get so stuck on, success being, how many books I sold or I don't know. Everybody has a way that they measure success. And when you can say success for me is when I give and somebody receives that and they're blessed from it, then that's something totally different. And I wish more people were like that. And I love Ginger Scott. She's cool people down there in Arizona.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I am totally with you on the giving back, and if that's the way that you make sure that you rest and you stay balanced, then I'm all for that. I'm all for that way that you balance yourself out. And so with that,
part of it, I still have to get better. Believe me.
And so with that, then when you're doing, the writing, because you have all these things that you have to balance out. I do kind of want to talk a little bit about the Grip series, and then the next series that you're working on, because I kind of want to have an idea about what prompted you or compelled you to write this particular series, and why do you think that so many people have been so attached to the story and the characters?
I had never planned to write the Grip series. I had written a series. I'll go back. My first book, like I said, I was on the river. I started writing those books, and 4 books came out of that. And those are all, and some people don't really make the distinction, but those are all traditionally published, meaning there is, some New York City publisher. For me, it's Hachette Forever Romance, who you worked with to put these books out. And I didn't self-publish until a few years ago. And the first series that I self-published was called the Soul Series. And it was this book about this former piano prodigy and this girl from small town Georgia, because I lived in Georgia for 20 years, who moved to LA. And it's all about, these 2 characters. And there were these 2 side characters, Grip and Bristol. And Grip was the rock star, Ryson. It was his best friend. And they had attended a performing arts high school together. And he had this whole rich background of being from California, and he was a poet. And then when he came to write, he basically was there writing. It got him a scholarship into this performing arts high school because he's from Compton and had never experienced a lot of these things. And he starts interfacing with this whole new world and these different people and these artists. And so anyway, he was a side character, and Bristol is Ryson's sister, his twin sister. And so they had their place in that story, but then a lot of readers started asking about those 2 characters because there was this tension between them. But it was just part of that other story that Grip had a quote-unquote crush on Bristol. And everybody started asking me for that story, and I never planned to write it. And so then I was on the 3rd book. There are 3 books in the Soul series. Right before I started writing the 3rd book, I have a friend, Margie Longoria, who has been with me since book 1, and she's amazing. And she says that she dictates my writing schedule because I'll think that I'm done with something, and she's like, oh, no, you are going to write this book. Oh, no, you're going to write this book. And so she was like, I'm telling you, you need to write Grip. And I just kept telling her no, because I had the story that's coming out in March of 2018, this basketball story. I was like, no, I'm writing the basketball story. And she goes, okay. And I was walking, like I said, I was out walking, and all of a sudden I started thinking about Grip and Bristol, and I started thinking about how Grip would have grown up. And I started thinking about things that were going on in our country and how those things kind of could interface beautifully with what Grip had grown up with. And then Bristol, because that was a relationship that was obvious. There was obviously a lot of sexual tension and a lot of history with the 2 of them that you saw in the Soul series, but I never built it out. And I just started on one of my walks, infamously, one of my walks. I started building kind of their backstory and what would have led them to a place where they weren't together, but obviously they should be. And that kind of led me to writing the story. And for people who don't know, there is a lot of, and this, you don't see this a lot in romance, I guess. And when you ask what has attached people to it, I think there's several things because I've had more response to, I had my readership before, which is awesome, but I would say that the Grip series has probably doubled my readership. And that most people, but probably about 60% or so of my readers found me because of the Grip series, and that the Grip series really distinguished itself. And I think there's several factors. One is I think there's a real appetite for diversity, and Grip obviously is an African American, and Bristol is a white woman, so it's an interracial romance. Which I mean, I think there's a lot of interracial romance, but I think that what you don't see as much, especially in the circles that I'm operating most of the time, is where the dynamics of what that relationship would actually be in the real world are discussed. And then in the context of the current climate we live in. And that's one thing that I think also people have attached to. There is a lot of social justice in the book. And I think because we are in a place in our country where these issues are bubbling up to the front constantly, in every, there was a lot of, there's discussed in the Grip series is tensions between law enforcement and colors and communities of color, is, inherent bias, is criminal justice reform, is systemic racism, is, lingering bias against interracial couples. There's a lot that's packed into this series, and I try to do it as organically as possible. But when you ask what has attached people to it, I think it is all of those things. I think there's an appetite for diversity, which is there. But, I mean, it's not just in this book. Diversity is so important to me. I don't see as much of it read, as it should be and promoted as it should be. But I always, you will not pick up a Kennedy Ryan book and find a monochromatic cast. There is not one book I have written that has all of anything, not all white people, not all black people, because that's not the world I live in, nor is it the world I desire to live in. So I am constantly, and when I read books and I see people of color erased, completely not present, I just think, where is this place? Because this is not where I live, and this is not what the world around me looks like. And so for me, and anybody who wants to do that, that's completely awesome for them. But I am someone who writes out of conviction. I don't think that you'll talk to me for very long and not hear that I'm a passionate person. And so I have formed convictions around certain things, and I tend to write out of those. But the characters came first for the Grip series. Like, I just started thinking, what would these characters' lives actually be like in the world we live in now? And as I started to be real about that, that's when I had to start to face some of these issues. And I think for some people, when they initially heard about it, especially because I was writing it right around the time of the election, they thought, oh my gosh, it's a politics book, it's a quote unquote race book, it's going to be divisive. And I have found that it's the exact opposite, because I don't know if you've read them, but I'm very careful about presenting a fully dimensional perspective. There is a poem that I wrote for Grip called Bruise. And it literally, a bruise, black and blue. And it's a play on words of black and blue and the black-blue debate, blue police officers and, people of color. And I co-wrote that with a spoken word artist in Atlanta. And I told him I want the first stanza to be from the perspective of, a young black man who's been pulled over, quote unquote, driving while black, DWB. And I want the second stanza to be from the perspective of a good police officer, who his job, and because both of those things should be represented. And so people really latched on to Bruise because if either side of the debate you're on, it's represented, because it's basically like we should constantly be putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, be trying to understand other people's perspective. And I find that in this divisive climate that we're living in now, we yell at each other on Facebook. We put people in categories, and we say, well, if you do that, if you voted for him, then I can't talk to you. And if you did that, then I can't listen to you. And we don't learn from one another. We don't exchange perspectives. And there's very little actual dialogue going on. It's just kind of anger and just division. And as I wrote this book, I didn't want it to be that. I wanted it to be a talking point. I wanted it to be something that could spark real dialogue. And when I tell you that every day I get an email, I get a PM, I get a message, something from someone who said, I never knew it was like that for Black people, or I never knew it was like that for, I get emails from moms who say, I would never think to tell my son that he had to go through all those steps just to drive. So that if a police officer stops him, like to have his hands on the wheel, to have his life, she was like, why would he have to do all of that? And she said, when I read the Grip series, I realized there are people who I've had people who say, after I read Still, which is the third book, I went and watched, the 13th documentary on criminal justice reform. After, you know what I'm saying? It's like, for me, it's been the most rewarding experience because, yes, I write romance, but I never wanted to, it's always something else. Like, there's always a conviction, there's always a message, there's always something that we will talk about that's embedded inside the love story. And that is what has been so rewarding for me, is the exchange of information and perspective that's come out of this experience.
Yeah, and I think that you put a lot of things that people can relate to in the story, and that's something that for readers or listeners like me who listen to audiobooks as well are looking for when we find a book. So really, there's hardly ever anything that's just like it's just a romance book. And like you said, there's you want your book to have some type of meaning to it, which is what your story has to it. So we're not just looking at them as a couple, we're looking at these different instances that are happening in society. And because the way that things are on social media, like you said, well, if you did this, I'm unfriending you and I don't like this person. These are things that people can, because we like books, we can read it, and and it is a good way for people to understand what is going on without us browbeating or just saying, well, this is how it is. Well, I want you to read this story, and you can see in this story how things play out for us, for people on both. Now, this is when both sides works, Donald Trump. When you see both, you see both sides. When you, like you mentioned about cops police officers who really are doing their job versus the ones who are racial profiling or just going around, doing these things that are kind of abusing authority. And also for just people who just happen to be of color who are just out. And so I am in the middle of the audiobook, so I haven't finished it yet. So I did start. It's a really long audiobook, so I have to piece it out a little bit. But I
write long books.
I was like, oh, okay, it's 14 hours. I have to piece it out a little bit. But just so you know, I am reading the story, and now since you said that they were secondary characters from your other series, I feel like I need to go backwards because I hate.
You know what? The only thing is I wrote it specifically so that you don't get very much of their story at all, because I knew that there were going to be people who found the Grip series first. And so the only thing that you really learn is that they get together, which is a romance novel, so they get together. But I don't give you...
You're missing the point. Okay, first of all, when I read stuff, I'm always backwards. So I always start in the middle of the series somewhere. And then these other characters are mentioned and something will happen and they'll say, remember when we did such and such? And I'm like, no, I don't remember when you did such and such. And so it's like, oh, you should have started with the other series. And so then that's how my brain processes. It's like, oh, you meet them 4 books ago, 5 books ago. And so it's now I want to go back 5 books so I can know. So that's just how I am, kind of.
No, a lot of people are like that. But I will say that because most people find the Grip series first, from what I've heard from people, because I don't really refer very much back to them, I definitely let them be in this story and how they function and interact with these characters in this story, and don't really refer back very much to their story. A lot of readers find that they can go back and read it easily, and they learn everything is new for them because I don't refer to very much. Okay. But I get it. A lot of people, once they realize that, go back and start with the full series, which is completely fine. But I think you can do it either way and be happy, depending on what kind of reader you are.
Okay, well, since I'm halfway through the audiobook, now I have to finish Grip anyway because I already started there. So I might as well I'll keep going, and then I'll just go backwards after I finish Still. Then I'll just go backwards and start from the beginning.
Still's not on audio yet, so Still
I know, I'm waiting. I can be patient.
Oh, yeah. It'll be a while. It'll be a while before.
That's all right. I have enough to keep me occupied until. Trust me, I've got enough to do.
I'm sure.
But okay, so you have a new series that you're working on, and it's related to to basketball and domestic violence, and so I kind of want to learn a little bit more about that, which what we can see in 2018.
Yeah. For me, like I said, I was supposed to write this book before I wrote Grip because I never planned to write Grip. And so I had finished the Soul series and I said, okay, because you don't really see in our circles, I'm, primarily an indie romance writer, but I'm also a hybrid. So, with traditional publishing, you just don't see a lot of basketball romance. Most of what you see is hockey and football and baseball. And I'm not really into those sports. I'm really, really, really into basketball. I'm a little obsessed with it, actually, and very, very passionate about it. My husband is the one who's like, babe, the neighbors can hear you because I'm screaming my head off. I'm a Tar Heel, die hard. Like, that's my alma mater. I am, that's where I went to college. But I was a Tar Heel fan way before I went to college. That was literally, I mean, obsessively. That was UNC Chapel Hill was the only school I applied to. And I didn't even tell my mom that. She thought, because of course, if you're applying to school, and it's very competitive. Yes. And, my mom was like, where are all of your acceptance letters and all of your, because she was like, you have to go to college. Where are all of your acceptance letters? And I said, well, I'm waiting on Carolina. And she was like, well, what about the others? And I said, that was the only one I applied to because that is where now, this is the kind of dramatic person I was because that's where I'm destined to go to school. She was like, oh, my gosh, no. Okay, let's try to get some applications together. And when that letter came, when my acceptance letter came for UNC Chapel Hill, I was like weeping with joy. But so I was obsessive about that, and I love basketball, and I love the NBA, but I'm more of a player. Mm-hmm. Meaning when Michael Jordan was in the league, like wherever Michael Jordan is, that's my team.
That was me. Yes.
He's GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. Yes. So, but then when he left, I needed another figure to come around. And so for me, I know a lot of people, he's very polarizing, but for me, it was Kobe Bryant. Because again, I identify with drive. Yeah. I identify with his killer instinct and with his competitive edge. And that's what I'm looking for is who are those people who are so driven that it's like if they have to, they can take the team and put them on their back. And, those are those miraculous moments in sports that we see originate with people like that. Mm-hmm. And so, it was Kobe, and I was a Lakers fan. My husband is Lakers, like, no matter what, even when they suck like they do now and have the last few, still a Lakers fan. And for me now, I'm a Warriors fan because I love Steph Curry. And so I'm Dub Nation all the way because I love Steph Curry. But then I also really love, and I know, see, when you get me talking about basketball,
I know you're like
thing, like really, because I also really love Russell Westbrook because he has that same killer instinct, and it's just like this charisma on court. And my love for the sport, I really see pairing that with, because I always tell people I write out of conviction. Mm-hmm. So I figure out, sometimes it's the story first. Like with the Soul series, it was the story first, and there were other things, there were messages that I could put in there. And with the Grip series, it was the characters. Mm-hmm. And the convictions grew out of what those characters' life experiences would have been. Me just realistically looking at Grip's childhood and how he would live really as a black man in America right now. Dating a white woman, but also he's an activist. So he really has to deal a lot with people who think, well, how can you, there are people who think, how can you be an activist for these issues? And you know what I'm saying? They see an incongruity with that when there actually isn't. It's the same if you're familiar with Jesse Williams. I feel like Jesse Williams has been negotiating the same thing where he is this very, very vocal person and activist on behalf of these issues, but then also was dating someone from another race and got a lot of flack for it. And he kept saying, these two things, these are not mutually exclusive. I can be this. And so I feel that's a lot of what Grip negotiates. And so that grew out of the characters. But sometimes the conviction for me comes first. And with the sports romance that I'm writing, the conviction came even before the characters. I was watching television like anybody else. ESPN is on our house constantly. It's like the church of ESPN. And the Ray Rice video came on where he knocked his then fiance unconscious and dragged her out of the elevator like a bag of trash. Right. And when I saw that, there was a righteous indignation around that issue. And I said to my husband, oh, I'm writing a book about this. Like, not about that instance specifically, but about domestic abuse, domestic violence in the context of professional sports. And I look at situations now where there are players who have, well-documented instances of domestic abuse, like stacked up, and they're still playing. And, they still have their endorsements, and they're still, walking around free. And for me, there is an indignation on behalf of women who live with these situations and how we as a culture negotiate them, and how we as a culture often allow people who are incredibly gifted with a ball, we allow them this impunity, like you are immune to the things that other people should deal with because of that, specifically in domestic abuse. But I will say it's not just professional athletes. Like I told you, my degree is journalism, my background is journalism. So I take a very investigative approach toward my books. And I usually do interviews, like for the books for the Grip series, I interviewed people. It's a whole process, investigative process, because of the nature of the books that I write. It's not something you just say, oh, I think I'll just write about this. Right. You have to dig into these issues if you're going to represent them with any accuracy and authenticity. And so as I'm preparing for this book, I've been doing personal interviews with survivors of domestic abuse. And it's not just, I think we know this, but I really needed to identify with it. It's not just impunity in the context of professional sports or people who are quote unquote privileged or people who quote unquote have a lot of money. The system fails women on every level. As I'm talking to survivors of domestic abuse, and I just hear over and over that, the police came and the police came and the police came and the judge told me to continue to try to work it out, and he could still see my children even after he found me in this safe house. And I'm like, why are our systems set up in such a way that a person who is a victim in this situation is still made vulnerable? Right. And why can't we, across the board, systemically close these gaps that people keep slipping through? And so that for me is a passion. Like when it comes to criminal justice reform, when it comes to abuse, when it comes to whatever I'm writing about, I'm always looking at those places where people are less vulnerable. And so I'm in the process of writing that book now. I'm very excited about it. People always ask me, is the hero the abuser? He is not. The hero of the book is not the abuser. So that's all I'll say. But
we're happy that he's not.
Yeah, I am too. But there is a history of domestic abuse, and I'm going to be dealing with that. And the hero is a basketball player, and so it'll be set in the context of the NBA, and I'm just really excited about it. I'm projecting March because I would really like it to sync up with March Sadness and all of that. Of course, because that's for
the Final Four.
Final Four. Yes, there's actually a theme of the NCAA tournament in the book because it starts when they're in college and then follows them for years. So, so I'm really excited about that, and pouring a lot of energy and research and preparation into writing that.
And is this book a standalone, or do you see it being more than one book, like a series?
I am writing it as a standalone, but there are secondary characters in the book that could definitely have their own story. So I could potentially see 3 to 4 books coming out of this one story, but it depends. Like I have a writing schedule, and the next book that I will write will not be probably in this world. I've been avoiding for a long time writing about autism. I mean, like I told you, I write about autism all the time.
Right.
But as far as like a novel that deals with autism, and that's what I'll be working on after this book, is a novel about an embattled married couple negotiating the challenges of raising a child with autism and their love story in the midst of that. I like to see love tried. I like to see love tested. And that's a theme that you'll see through everything. And I think all books have conflict. You have to have some conflict where it's not exciting and there's why do I keep reading? But I am very interested, and probably out of my own personal experience, because like I said, I don't know if I said it, my husband and I have been married for 20 years. And when we went through a really, really rough patch when my son was diagnosed with autism, and then my husband lost his job, and there were just all of these challenges. And for like a decade, I felt like we were in a crucible. And if you know what a crucible is, in chemistry, a crucible is a porcelain dish where you put these metals in and then you basically set it on fire. And everything that is not used or not pure burns away, and only what is pure and usable is left. And that's what it felt like my marriage was. That's what it felt like my whole life was for a really long time. I felt like I've been thrown into this crucible and set on fire, and that everything that I couldn't use in my journey, everything that wasn't pure, everything that wasn't true was being burned away. And I like to see couples in that context because there's this line from Still, which you haven't gotten to yet, but it says love, it's bad that I can't remember it now, but it says something like falling in love is a butterfly or something like that, and then love tested is an anchor. And just the difference I would draw from when I first got married, and it talks about how when we first get married, our vows are an assumption, and that it's life that tests them and makes them into a commitment. And that's what I like to see, in the books I read, especially if it's featuring a married couple, because I do believe that when I said to my husband those vows, when I confessed those vows to him on our wedding day, they were an assumption. It's like I assume that I'm going to be able to do these things. I assume that I'm going to be able to do. He assumes that he's going to cherish me, but it has to be tested, and it's over time and through circumstances, often difficult circumstances, that those assumptions become commitments. And that's what I'm really interested in. So with the autism book writing after that, that's the process you'll see this couple in. And then maybe I'll return to the basketball series. We'll see.
Maybe. Well, it sounds like you've already got a full plate ahead of you for 2018, and we will be definitely watching to see what's coming out and what you're doing and what's going on with you and everything like that. And so I'm excited to read your next stories, and also what's coming up for you with your foundation and everything like that. And I like those stories that are tested and that have those I guess those things that happen in the middle of a relationship to really see if it's gonna stand. And those are meaty books, not some meat in it. And not just a potato chip, because you'll still be hungry.
Yes, I call those happily even after stories, and that's kind of what I like. Sometimes I like to write those.
Well, I like to read them and listen to them on audio, so that helps out a lot. So, well, thank you so much for being on the show. I mean, I have learned so much about you and your writing, and I'm looking forward to more. And for those who are listening, I would love for them to be able to connect with you either online through your website or through social media. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with them how they can connect with you and find you.
Oh, yeah, of course. All of my information is on KennedyRyanWrites.com, and I'm on Instagram, KennedyRyan1, and I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook, Kennedy Ryan. So I'm everywhere. I'm on YouTube. So if you go to my website, all of my platforms are listed, and obviously on Facebook. I have a readers group that is very active, and that's where I premiere a lot of things first. I'm there every day. So it's called Kennedy Ryan Books, and you can search Kennedy Ryan Books on Facebook and it'll bring it up. So I'm very easy to find, and I feel like I'm everywhere.
She's everywhere. And so are you doing any signings or anything like that either toward the end of this year or next year where we can find you hanging out?
Yes, I just did Authors in the OC, which was so much fun. I'm here in California, but all the other signings I did all last year were on the East Coast, which had me crossing the country all year.
Oh,
so
gosh,
this year,
yes.
I know. I mean, I did Philly, I did New York, I did Raleigh, I was in Charlotte. It was like, my husband was like, could you do something that's closer to home?
I know.
So actually, for real, right? So this year I really only have 3 signings that I'm scheduled for right now. Dallas, I'm doing the Bells, Dallas, the Dallas signing. That's in February, Dallas Bells. I'm doing that one. I'm doing, there's one in Portland. I'm doing the Bells, it's Southern Bells, and they are in Portland. I'm doing that one. I think that's in July, I think that's in July. And then I'm doing Love in Vegas in the fall of 2018. Not the Love in Vegas that is about to happen like in the next few days or so. The Love in Vegas in 2018. I'll be doing Vegas then.
Well, perfect. So we will be checking your website just in case you add some additional ones. Maybe you can add one or two more, maybe in California, perhaps. And
I may be doing the OC again. I haven't even checked, but I loved that one, and it's literally, there goes that word again, an hour away. It's just a drive to Anaheim from San Diego. So I would love to do another one here in California.
Well, you use the word literally, and usually my word is really or so. So, yes. So see how I just said so again? Yes. I use those words a lot, and
there are such words.
Yeah, it's a filler, and like
yes,
I know I want to use another word, but right now my brain is not calculating what other word it needs to use. So it is, or really big.
Absolutely.
It totally happens. Well, thanks again so much for being on this episode of Bookin' Around Town. As you guys know, we have booked around the town of San Diego. So I've been in California a lot. So I was excited about sitting down and chatting with Kennedy Ryan. Next time we will do this face to face when
I would love that.
When I'm not sick. I will make sure next time I come out there, I will not have a cold, and we will make
do
this
lunch.
happen. We will, yes. Anything over food, I'm excited about that. So
as long as I'm not cooking. Yep.
No, I will cook. How about that? I will cook.
How about that? I would love that.
That would be fun. It's Bookin' Around Town meets diners, drive-ins, and dives. I will cook and talk about books at the same time. So that's our new show. We got it.
Yes! I'll be your first guest.
You can be. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure that you are following us on Facebook at Bookin' Around Town. Also on Instagram at Bookin' Around Town, and on Twitter at Bookin' Around TWN. This and all episodes can be found on iHeartRadio as well as TuneIn, and can be downloaded on iTunes or Google Play. And as always, we are on YouTube if you prefer YouTube channel, on the Bookin' Around Town channel. Thanks so much to my producer Danielle at Firefly Productions and my assistant Rebecca for all that you do. Until next time, everybody, remember, keep booking. Have a great week.